Hello, and welcome to another episode of Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler, and today I'd like to talk about the Britain's peace feelers towards Hitler Germany. Now, we all know the story about how the British nation, was united under the lion Churchill, and they were determined not to make any agreement with Hitler, and that it was just a unified country, and that's not quite the case. First of all, we have to look at Churchill himself. And Churchill was not a popular figure in 1939-40. He had a lot of baggage. I think that's what he was a conservative, although he'd been a liberal before that. And that's another reason some people didn't like him. He turned from liberal to conservative, or from conservative to liberal to conservative again. He was responsible in large measure for the disastrous Gallipoli campaign against the Turks in World War I. Okay, and that hung to him a long time. A lot of Australian, New Zealand soldiers were killed in that fighting the Turks. And then during the national strike, the only, like, the whole country went on strike in 1926, and Churchill was breathing almost like fire and slaughter to put down these strikers that are undermining the very foundations of the empire. And then after that, he was in all through this period, he was against independence for India, even home rule for India, like let the Indian mayors be Indian and that sort of thing. No, even home rule, nothing like independence. Meanwhile, the Labor Party is saying, yes, independence. If we get in, we will we will push for independence for India. And then finally, he was on the wrong side, as I guess most historians would say, in the abdication crisis, Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson. He was all for he was just the king's man. And of course, he lost out on that as well. So by the time Chamberlain had been not voted out of office, but vote of no confidence. This is the parliamentary system. We just don't have confidence in this man and this gentleman anymore. So they did there's no constitution or anything. How do you provide for candidates or anything like that? So the Conservative Party, which was in office then by a fairly large majority, in its own arcane, quiet British, ways, determined that Churchill and Lord Halifax would be the two people most likely to lead the nation as prime minister. And so they went to King George VI, who, as you probably know, was Queen Elizabeth's daddy, and the late Queen Elizabeth's daddy. And King George VI wasn't very keen on Churchill either, basically for the same reason that I've given you, man. He hated the fact that Edward VIII had abdicated and put him in there. He was, as you know, if you've ever seen the King's speech, he stuttered. Much of that was cured by that expert that he hired for him, but nonetheless, he still was nervous. Not in great health. He didn't live that long after being in the. Well, I mean, he died in 1952, so we're talking about 1940 here. So he didn't really go for Churchill that much. So very stiffly, Churchill approached and Lord Halifax and kissed hands, that type of thing, the king. And then this story is, I mean, nobody was there with a tape recorder or anything, but the story goes that King George said, "I'd like to have you, Lord Halifax, be my prime minister." And Halifax said, "Well, I'm Lord Halifax, and I couldn't really control Parliament from the House of Commons. I'm not a commoner. I'm a lord." Now, whether he did that or not, I'm not sure. But at least the final thing was that King George said, "Mr. Churchill, I'd like you to be my prime minister," and so he was. Although this one, he's prime minister the very day that this conference took place, when the Germans broke through on the Western Front, invading everybody's country, which is what Germans of that generation did. Holland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and then France. And you have the fall of France, the quick fall of France. But I want to mention something about the fall of France, which I've never heard. I've read it, but I've never heard a historian say it. This was it was like from May 10th till the French surrendered on June 22nd. So was that 6 weeks, something? In that brief campaign, that so-called walkover, with the surrender, the surrendering French, 90 to 100,000 French soldiers died. So somebody was fighting back. But that's just to the side. I want to mention that. Um, so now the question is, what do we do now? As you know, the small boat thing, the Dunkirk, the miracle of Dunkirk. Why did Hitler? Because the German armor is right there, practically outside Dunkirk. There was a fort. There was a holdout garrison at Calais, composed of British and French, and they held off the Germans. Were all captured or killed, and then Hitler says, "This we got to go back and rehabilitate the tanks. We need more equipment and so on." So just why Hitler did this, we don't know for sure, but he did it, and the Panzers stopped, and that gave the British time to get most of their troops off of Dunkirk, although none of their equipment. Okay, and so now this is the dark point, the darkest hour of Great Britain when it was the most danger since the Spanish Armada. And the bombing hadn't started yet. And see, this is the thing. The Hitler is kind of, well, the British, they're Aryans, they're kind of decadent maybe, but I don't want to just wipe them out or anything. So at least through neutral sources such as Spain, particularly Spain, but probably Switzerland, Norway, or I'm sorry, not Norway. The Germans invaded Norway too, but Sweden. They learned that Hitler's peace demands, and even on the basis of a peace treaty, would be pretty much give us back some of our colonies that you took away from us in World War One. Like, you can have colonies, but I can't. Of course, you lost the war, so you're going to lose something, and we're not going to really interfere with your way of life. And we don't really not that keen on democracy, but that's what you want, okay? And again, you don't have any land borders with us. We aren't really afraid of you, and you're kind of our type of people. And so Lord Halifax, I think he later became ambassador to Spain. Spain was neutral in the war, pro-fascist, after Franco had defeated the moderately leftist government after a bloody 3-year war, and got a lot of equipment, a lot of support from Hitler and Mussolini, not just verbal support. I mean, he got tanks, aircraft, artillery, money, whatever. So Halifax went to Spain and got the terms from the German ambassador in Spain, and then flew back to England. And there he told Churchill and the cabinet that his terms are pretty reasonable. And I'll tell you, see, there's a lot. There was the innate dislike of much of the Conservative Party for Churchill, as well as the high Tory conservatives really were kind of pro-German. Now, they might not be fascist, although some of them were, but they felt that for one thing, Hitler's a bulwark against the communists. I mean, he fought the communists were going to take over Spain, and of course the communists, the Russians gave all kinds of equipment to Spain, although at a cost of the entire Spanish treasury, which heaped up with the golds of India and the Indies. The Spanish Empire was shipped to Russia temporarily. They never got it back. And in exchange, of course, they got a lot of Russian equipment and so on. So, and they're fighting Franco. So I think Franco and Hitler is a supporter of Spain. So they are anti-communist. Certainly Hitler made no secret about the fact he was anti-communist until the Hitler-Stalin Pact of August 1939. Still, there was a really innate feeling amongst the high Tories and so on that we can do business with Hitler. He's not a bloody communist, at least. And the Nazis aren't the kind of people you'd invite over for a weekend tea, and hunting. But we can still do business with. So I would say almost a majority of the cabinet, the inner cabinet of Churchill's administration, would say we can probably do a deal with Hitler. And Churchill said, no, there's no way. Now, in the movie The Darkest Hour, it was like Churchill takes a trip on the subway just to find out what's going on, how the English people feel. And of course, they were astonished to see him on the subway, the tube, the underground. But he learned from them that, no, we will never give up. We will never. And so he used that to sort of then he told the cabinet that these people, and he named them, are actually against against any kind of peace with Hitler. It's interesting. Another sidelight here: Churchill. That would be if it ever happened. The second time he was on the Underground during the general strike, the taxis were on strike, but the Underground was running for some reason. And so people said, well, taxi, we'll take the Underground. It might be a bit of a giggle for you. So he gets down there, and they had to rescue him. He's just going around, riding around underneath London, and just clueless. So I mean, everywhere he went by either taxi or limo. His own limo, of course. He was of the upper class. I mean, he was a man who's beloved of the people and so on. But he was the younger son of an earl, and he was he lived the life. I mean, champagne. He was constant imbiber. I guess you could say that he was a chronic alcoholic, but didn't interfere with his work at all. But so he had champagne Charlie taste, okay, and at any rate, our class of people just don't take the Underground, don't you know? But anyway, whatever the reason, he comes back to the cabinet meeting and says, we're not going to give in, and the cabinet goes along with him. I think he's gradually gaining popularity, but he did get out amongst the people. And later on, of course, he and King George VI got out and met with the average Englishman, especially in areas that have been blitzed. In fact, by 1941, a year into the war, Churchill and George VI became very, very good friends, and soulmates, as it were, to fight the Nazis, as Churchill called them. And when George VI died, I was over there actually at the time in England. He made a very, very wonderful tribute. By this time, Churchill had come back in 1951 to defeating the Labour government. Although it's interesting, the Labour government got the majority vote, but the House seats went, and that can happen in this country too. The House seats went to the Conservative Party, so they were called on by George VI to form another government. And he wrote a very, very poignant tribute to what George VI had gone through. He was not a strong man, as I say. He got cancer fairly early. The House of Windsor were inveterate smokers, and they make that point very clear in The Darkest Hour that George VI is always smoking away. And and it's that's that plus the strain of the war, I suppose. Actually, Buckingham Palace was bombed. We don't know if it was that deliberate or not, but it was fairly badly bombed. And if the king and the queen had been by the window where the bomb blast blew in, they might have been killed or seriously injured. And then Queen Elizabeth said, "We can look the East End in the face now," because the East End was getting walloped, by the German bombers, and it seemed like all the toffs out and the nicer neighborhoods were escaping us. And well, now we can look them in the face as well. But it's certainly true that it was Churchill who rallied the English people in their darkest hour, but there was a lot of opposition to that and a lot of upper class, the better type, don't you know, who felt that Hitler might be a gutter snipe and whatever, but he's anti-communist, and that's a mark in his favor. And Churchill, he's really almost a wild man. Well, I just wanted to point out some of the little anomalies of history, things that are not really written about that much in the history books, that the nation was not united against Hitler in the early days of Churchill. Well, thank you again for listening. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Hope you'll be listening again and watching. Bye-bye.